The Bi-Weekly Wiccan Service podcast is brought to you by TechWitch Detroit. TechWitch Detroit for all your IT needs. Please visit us on the web at techwitchdetroit.com. techwitchdetroit.com. We can help.
This episode of PPT Presents is brought to you by Pagan Pathways Temple. Pagan Pathways Temple is a 501c3 out of beautiful Madison Heights, Michigan. We offer classes, both online and in person, community outreach, ritual space, and a library available to our members. To find out more, or to become a member, please go to paganpathwaystemple.org or patreon.com/paganpathwaystemple. Pagan Pathways Temple, growing in the old ways where all paths are open.
Good morning, afternoon. I am Nashan, guiding priest of Pagan Pathways Temple. We're here back at the temple for our Wiccan service today. And I want to thank you guys for joining us, those of you who are able to make it. I apologize again for starting a little bit late because, well, life happens. And I often run late, so things happen. But it's been a busy weekend so far. A lot has happened. I've had to do a lot of work on the spiritual side of my life in order to help some individuals in order to stand up for certain other things. And I got into, we won't say a conflict. We'll say a discussion, a heated discussion this weekend with some individuals at the Hazel Park protest. Now, this protest was designed to further cement the idea and the understanding that as a people, there are certain ways that police conduct themselves that are not acceptable. And personally, this really sort of hit home with me because as a black man in this country, I deal with the stigma of racism, as do my children. So when I go to these protests, I go for both the social reasons, because these are ways that are not acceptable in our society, but also for very deeply personal reasons. So there were some gentlemen who showed up at the protest near the end and who were preaching about the fire and brimstone philosophy of Christianity. The, repent or die, or repent or burn in hell forever philosophy of Christianity. And under normal circumstances, I have no problem with people promoting their belief, whether I share them or not. One of the primary tenets on which the temple was founded was that all paths are open, that regardless of which deities you follow or which paths you follow, that they are welcome here. And that has always been the way that we operate. So that there are Christians who have come here, there are Christians who I've counseled, there are Muslims, there are Jews who I've counseled. All of them have a place and a home here, regardless of whether or not they follow a pagan philosophy or a pagan belief. But these gentlemen did not come to the protest to support the cause or what we were doing. They showed up to disrupt. And I found that to be offensive. So I originally went over just to take a picture of these gentlemen, just to document for my purposes, and ended up in a discussion with them that, shall we say, got a little heated. The point of it was that the reason I got involved in this conversation with them was because they stepped over a line with me. And that line is relatively simple. I abhor hypocrisy when it comes to religion. I seriously dislike those who pervert the ideas and tenets of a religion for their own purposes, especially to manipulate others into fearing or hate mongering or to divert from a real purposeful event, which is why they showed up. They showed up specifically to divert attention from the George Floyd protest and divert it towards you're all going to burn in hell because you're gay you're all going to burn in hell because you're pagan. You're all going to burn in hell because you don't believe Christianity the way that I believe Christianity, fire and brimstone sort of philosophy. And it really upset me. So one of the things that I did when I got into this discussion was to try to keep my calm initially. That did not work. But I didn't walk away from it. So I found myself in a situation where I was very angry, very loud, very aggressive, and yelling a lot. But it really kind of hit home with me how deeply ingrained that idea is with who I am, my sense of self. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today, was the sort of standards that we place on our lives, the principles by which we live. Winston Churchill says, you have enemies? Good. That means you've stood up for something at some point in your life. I'm a big believer that those individuals who are who stand on principle are fairly easy to identify, because someone's going to have something negative to say about them. The individuals who are going to push for a baseline of behavior about how we're supposed to conduct ourselves and how we're supposed to be as human beings are going to, by their very philosophy and their very nature, engender some animosity. They're going to create a sense that someone's going to come after them for whatever it is that they're promoting. And that's going to happen. And that's one of the things that we should expect if we are going to establish and then live by standards or have them in our own lives. You're going to run into those people who are not going to like it. We've all had that situation where we've decided to do something or change something about ourselves and raise our standard on our behavior, raise our standard on how we see ourselves and how we conduct ourselves in the world. And then you have that friend or family member who has something to say about it. You know, if you stop smoking, you think you're better than the rest of us because you stopped smoking, or you stopped drinking. You don't know how to party anymore. You don't have a good time anymore because you don't drink anymore. They always have something to say, and you're going to engender that sort of pushback whenever you attempt to elevate who you are as a person and who you are as a being. That's a natural reflex. Those who are used to the way that you've been, those who are used to the way that you've conducted your business or lived your life up to that point are going to have a problem with who you decide to become. And if you are pushing a standard that is in opposition to the accepted norms, then you're definitely going to end up with some opposition and some pushback. One of the things that we expected when we opened the temple here was to get some pushback from the public. And we did. We got some pushback from individuals who came and threw Bibles out our window and yelled and screamed and cussed out our temple keepers at one point, because that's the natural thing, where you're asking them to accept an idea that is in opposition to what they consider to be their norm. And they don't understand our standards. So therefore, the standard is you go along with what's been done, with tradition, and these are the religions you follow. This is the way you follow them. And if you don't follow those traditions, well, then you're a bad person, which is what these gentlemen came out to that protest in order to profess, that our way is the only way. Our way is the right way. And so they came at us for the sole purpose of pushing back against those who decided to stand up against something that isn't the norm in order to push their own agenda. It's like I told them when we were having our discussion. If you truly understood the philosophy of your own religion and the teachings of Christ, you would understand that love comes first. And love would have said for you to come down and support these individuals who are standing up for an American ideal of, one, protest against those things that we consider to be tyranny, two, standing up for those who are the minority and who are oppressed, and three, standing up against the brutality of another American citizen. You would have come because all of those things stand in line with the love that Christ asked for all of us to promote. If that's what you were here for. But that's not what you're here for. Leonardo da Vinci says, I love those who can smile in trouble, who can gather strength from distress, and grow brave by reflection. 'Tis the business of little minds to shrink, but they whose heart is firm and whose conscience approves their conduct will pursue their principles unto death. I wondered for a moment why I couldn't just let that pass. The smart move would have been to just let it go. The actual rally was over. It had already ended. They had done with their speakers, and the crowd had left. And here I was, still in the corner of the street, yelling and screaming with these guys about what it means to be a better human. When we endeavor to set a certain set of standards for our principles, these ideas that we have decided that we're going to live by, it becomes nearly impossible to stand by and allow those principles to be trampled upon. And the reason for that is because they become a part of what we are. They become a part of our sense of identity, of who we think we are. And when we believe, I am attempting to be a better human, I am attempting to become this idealized version of humanity, even though I may never reach it, when we put that as a part of who we are and our sense of who we are, a violation of that is a violation of who we are. It becomes almost physically painful to stand witness to a violation of the principles and the standards that we set. And it becomes nearly impossible for us to continue to hold ourselves to this idea or the standard that we've set for who we are in the face of that if we do nothing. Because we take the opposition to it, and we can either act upon that because it is our standard, or we internalize it and we choose not to act, and then the opposition becomes internal. Then the struggle no longer is between us and the idea or the person or the standard that was set, but it's now between us and us. It's between ourselves. Now you are in conflict with the very nature of who you are. And that is a dangerous place to be. Both individuals and societies cannot live with internal conflict for long. It starts to erode the sense of self. It starts to destroy the sense of being. And there can be no happiness that grows from that, only conflict and strife. So it's important to understand that if we're going to set these standards, if we're going to say, okay, this is who I am, this is how I act, if we're going to promote this idea, especially to others and to ourselves, then when it comes time for that conflict, we have to live up to that standard, or we become hypocrites. And hypocrisy, well, that's a poison. And that poison will ultimately destroy you, or the society in which it lives. Abraham Lincoln says that slavery is founded in the selfishness of man's nature. Opposition to it is his love of justice. These principles are an external antagonism, and when brought into collision so fiercely as slavery extension brings them, shocks and throes and convulsions must ceaselessly follow. You cannot live as a nation, as a society, as a culture, as an individual with internal conflict for long. You cannot have two opposing ideas or senses of self internally without them coming into conflict. You cannot say we are a nation of free people who value justice and liberty and the rule of law, but at the same time, we are going to violate the rights of another group of citizens. We're going to enslave them and abuse them and allow horrors to be heaped upon them without actually standing up for it. You cannot have those two things internally without conflict and strife. They're in diametric opposition to one another. So when you're talking about yourself as an individual, you cannot say, I am this good person who is seeking evolution, who is seeking, to be a higher, more loving being, but I'm going to witness horror and do nothing and allow fear and cowardice to keep me from doing what is my nature to do because of these principles that I've established. Those two things are diametrically opposed to one another. We cannot sit silently by and watch horror and do nothing. If we do that, then we cannot call ourselves good people. We cannot say that we're spiritually evolved, because spiritual evolution requires that we recognize the connection between all beings, that we recognize the connection between all humanity, between all nature, that we are part of this life cycle that is integral to the nature of the universe, that we are a part of this. We cannot say we're a part of this, but we're going to watch this other part suffer and do nothing and say nothing. You cannot say you are a good person and allow evil. To have these two forces within us creates internal conflict and doubt, and that conflict erodes our sense of self, and then we have no idea what we are. In fact, we no longer even have any control over what we are, because we've given up that control to whatever these forces decide to make of us. Thomas Paine says that an army of principles can penetrate where an army of soldiers cannot. There are those who I've spoken with who are very angry, who are very upset about current circumstances, and who are talking about overthrowing this and destroying that and conflict this and conflict that. And they've got all these great ideas about what to do, that involve violence and anger and all this stuff. And I said, that's a wonderful idea, except it doesn't work. There are times when during the Civil War, when you must stand in opposition of direct conflict. You must stand in opposition, but that's not this time. What we're talking about here is, in order to make a change, or the change that is necessary, it wasn't the armed conflict that created the change. It was the changing of ideas. It was the changing of philosophy. You want to talk about what actually won the right for people who look like me to be free in this country? It had nothing at all to do with the conflict that came from it. It had to do with enough people adopting the philosophy, the idea, and the standard that all people should be created equal, that all people have the same rights, and that all people should be treated the same. That idea and that philosophy is what sparked the conflict. But you start with the idea. So if we're talking about resolving this conflict in our country and within ourselves as individuals, especially within ourselves, we have to start with changing of the idea. We have to decide with, who are we? Because who we are determines what we'll do, what we'll tolerate, what standard we set. And anything below that standard creates conflict. And we won't stand for it. If we haven't determined what that standard is, because, traditionally we've always done this, and normally we always do that, well then, normally is what was. Traditionally is what was. If we're talking about changing the standard and changing that idea, then that's where we have to do the work. We have to talk about, how do we become this nation or this society or this set of beings that act in this way? What is our standard? And if the standard is that we're all created equal and we're not being treated equal, then there needs to be some changes to the way things have been done. There needs to be some changes in the way we view each other, the way we act towards each other, and what we as a society will stand up and tolerate. We will either stand in opposition to it or we will allow it to happen. There are two diametrically opposed ideas. We either stand up against it or we will allow it to happen. You can't have both. If you say that we are a people who believe in justice, then there must be justice, not the idea of justice without the actual action or implementation of it. We have to have real justice. If you want to make change, you can have an entire army of men and women who fight for a cause. But if they do not believe in that cause, they will lose. It doesn't matter how many bodies you throw at it. If they don't believe in their cause, they will lose. Whereas those who believe will do what is necessary to achieve that standard. Albert Bandura says that As we develop the moral aspect of our lives, we often adapt standards of right and wrong that serve as guides and deterrents for our conduct. When we're talking about these standards and these principles that we have decided to live by, okay, these are not principles that have been forced upon us or been given to us. I mean, we have traditions, but we decide. I mean, anybody who's ever met a teenager knows that I don't care how many traditions you hoist upon them, they're going to do what they want to do, period. Okay. And here's the thing. We can have all these traditions, and that's awesome. Okay. But ultimately, we decide for ourselves what our standards are, what our principles are, what we're going to live by. One of the excuses that I've been battling with in conversation with individuals for a long time has been, well, this is how, I was raised. This is, my family has always been this way. This is who I've been, for so long. I don't know how to change. And I can't accept that philosophy. Because here's the thing. If you were 12, I'd be like, okay, I understand that you're 12 years old. You don't know how to make decisions for yourself yet. You're still figuring out who you are. So your standards aren't set yet. Your principles aren't set. You're still developing. When you're 17, 18 years old, you're still kind of cementing who you're going to be or deciding who you're going to be. When you get older, I'm sorry, you decide who you are. And you decide whether or not those traditions or those ideas of the past, of your parents, of your family, of your culture, of your town, are yours or not. If they're not, then you are considered the rebel. You are the one who rebelled against the standard. You did the thing that no one thought you would do. If you decide that those standards are not yours, then you're going to do something different. You're going to decide for yourself. If you decide to adopt those, you still decided to adopt them. That's choice. We are not this blank slate that just gets imprinted upon by our parents and our culture, and we have no decision making in that process. We can be influenced by them, but we make decisions as to how much we accept and how much we reject. There are ideas and philosophies that my parents gave me that I said, I'm going to listen to you because you're my parent and I hear what you're saying, but I don't accept them because I don't think the way that you think. I don't believe that those ideas and traditions should be carried forward through me, so I choose not to accept them. But that's an individual choice that we have to make. Whether or not we are going to be the people that we say we are, or we're going to allow what has been to become our philosophy and the way that we conduct ourselves. We can't halfway be who we are. You either are or you're not. If you say you are a certain way, you live that way, whether it's fair weather or storms. If a storm comes and you falter, you're not that way. You've just been lying to yourself for some time. If a storm comes and you fold, then you aren't that way. We call them fair weather friends. When things are great outside and it's beautiful outside, they're all over the place. Oh, yeah, I love you. Everything's great. As soon as the storm hits, well, they become silent. They get real quiet. In fair weather, you can't shut them up. In the storm, all of a sudden, well, I don't really want to, I'm trying not to, I don't really want to get involved. That's why I said you can see who people are in this time of conflict. They're showing you who they are in this time of conflict. I think the world would be a lot better off if more people were to define themselves in terms of their own standards and values and not what other people said or thought about them. Hillary Clinton. I love the idea of tradition. The concept of tradition seems so safe. It's so easy. Well, all I have to do is fall back on what was done. But I believe in progress and evolution. And here's the problem with tradition. Tradition does not necessarily reflect the current time. It reflects the ideas of a time that is no longer here, that no longer exists. Tradition has a tendency to lock us into ideas and concepts that stagnate growth and don't become inclusive or don't take into account new ideas or new technologies or new philosophies. And so they stagnate the growth of the individual or the society or the country. Traditions are great for nostalgia, but they can't help you with new problems. Not to mention, oftentimes, they are limited in scope because they're limited in their inception by the people who created them. Because here's the thing about traditions that I try to remind people of. Those traditions that people love so much, that everybody loves and cherishes, guess what? Somebody made them up. All of them. Not one or two. All of them are made up. Someone decided this is a good idea. Let's do it this way. They didn't necessarily think 100 years into the future. They were thinking about right now, it'd be great if we danced around in the woods. Because, well, in part of the country that they lived in, or part of the world where they lived in, it was warm most of the time. One of the things that we ran into when we first started talking about the idea of the temple was the idea that traditionally we just go out into the woods. And I'm like, well, that's great, but I hate the cold. It's cold outside in winter in Michigan. Sorry, I don't want to go out in the snow because I've done it. As a pagan, I have been out in the snow in my bare feet doing ritual. And it is one of the most extraordinary experiences you might ever imagine. Okay. I don't recommend it. So I said, well, I can't be the only person who thinks this way. So perhaps in wintertime, rather than not have ritual at all, we could have a ritual in a place that's actually warm, that has indoor heating. And then we could still have ritual. I know it seems like a seriously off sort of way of looking at it, but that's a part of the philosophy of why this temple was started, was because we wanted someplace warm. It's Michigan. It gets cold. And it seems silly, but here's the truth. It's just something we made up. It's a tradition that got made up. Somebody made all of these things up. Whether or not we adopt them has to be determined by whether or not they actually have value in the current climate. There are those who told me that you are not a true witch unless you've made all of your own tools. That sounds wonderful when all you have to do is make tools as a part of your living and as a part of your business. When back in the day, when that's what people did, they made their own tools because you didn't have any tools. You couldn't go to Ace Hardware and buy a hammer. But now we have jobs that don't require making tools. We have other things that are going on. We live in one of the busiest times in human history because there's so much that we have to do and be responsible for. So I don't have time to necessarily go and make my own tools. If you do, make your own tools. It's awesome. Okay, but if you don't, no one can tell you you're not a witch or you're not a true pagan because you didn't make your own tools. So no one can tell you that you're not truly this or not truly that because you don't practice the way they think you should practice. These ideas and traditions are awesome, but they're ideas, and we can adapt them and change them for the current time. We have to, because that ability to adapt and change is the survival mechanism for human beings. It's our greatest superpower as beings on this planet. Other animals don't necessarily have the ability to do it. Those who don't die off. They go extinct. There's a whole list of them who couldn't adapt to their environment, and they're gone. We as humans can adapt to any climate. That's why we've been so successful. The problem we have is when it comes to these socially constructed traditions or ideas that I'm better than you or you're better than me because of whatever. You're better because you have more money than I do. Or I'm better because I've studied art longer than you have. These ideas or traditions are old baggage. They're old ways of thinking that no longer apply to the modern era. And we as human beings have to adapt to this change in order to maintain this new standard that's an old standard now being realized. Our principles are the standard upon which we base our sense of identity. They reflect the deepest parts of who we believe we are and who we aspire to become. To violate those principles by action or inaction is where true despair originates. That's one of mine. The reason why we have conflict in our country right now, and the reason why we have conflict within ourselves right now, is because we are in violation of basic standards for who we say we are as beings. You cannot say, I live in the land of the free and the home of the brave, if you have people who are trapped by violence, if you have people who are trapped by oppression, who are trapped by poverty, and who are being abused by the system. You cannot say we live in the land of the brave when you have those people with guns pointing them at people without them and taking life, without consequence. And that we, the people, have been standing by and allowing it to happen through our silent complicity. Those things are in conflict with one another. If we are going to be a society based on the rule of law, then the law has to apply to everyone. If we are going to be a race of people who believe that we are united and that we are one group of people, that we are one species, that we are one being, then we can't divide ourselves by color or sexual orientation or which religion we follow. Those two things are diametrically opposed. They create conflict because they are rooted in hypocrisy. They defy who we say we are. And so therefore, it creates internal struggle. Now, this is the person I didn't honestly think I'd ever quote because, as it turns out, I found out he was a bit of a racist. But the premise still holds. Our heritage and our ideals are our code and standards. The things we live by and teach our children are preserved or diminished by how freely we exchange ideas and feelings. Mr. Walt Disney. Now, whatever his ultimate personal philosophy was, that particular statement is correct. We cannot make the changes that are necessary to our society without having conversations that are difficult. We cannot make the changes that are required in our society without standing up and speaking out against those things that are inherently wrong in our society and admitting them to be true. In that video clip that I played, that I posted about the greatest 3 minutes of television, where he said the first step to correcting a problem is to admit that you have one. And here's the problem. We haven't been telling the truth to ourselves about who we've been. We haven't been speaking out against those things that we say we're against. We've been allowing them to sort of slide. So that when we're standing at a rally to bring attention to the murder of an innocent man, broadcast worldwide, when we are standing in opposition to that and someone comes across for the sole purpose to disrupt that and derail that conversation, I could not allow that to stand. I could not stand silently by and watch the work that was being done be derailed by a group of individuals who thought it, better to point, look at me. Let's don't look at this. Let's look over here. And then use the holy scripture of another faith to try to do that because it's common and it's tradition. And traditionally, when someone says you're going to hell and they start doing the fire and brimstone, traditionally people just kind of fall in line. Oh yeah, you're right. I better listen to you because you said hell and you said God said, and all of these ideas. And when I got into the conflict with these guys, one of the things I told them was like, you're talking to the wrong guy. I'm a pagan priest. I do not follow your philosophy, and your fear mongering does not scare me. Because that fear is what they use as a cudgel to bludgeon people with into submission. You're pagan, rebel by nature. Bring all the cudgels you want. We're going to laugh at you. But if that's the case, then that means we must rebel against all tyranny like that. If we're rebels, then we need to, and we identify that way, that we rebel against those things that are wrong in our society, then guess what? We need to step up to all things that are wrong in our society and fight against them and not sit quietly by. If that's our standard, then we have to live that standard, whether it's storming outside or sunny outside. Ray Kroc said the quality of a leader is reflected in the standards they set for themselves. I have heard leaders in recent times say things like, I'm not responsible. I have heard leaders in recent times say things like, that doesn't have anything to do with me. I've heard leaders in recent times say things like, it's their fault. I couldn't do anything about it. And these statements are a reflection of the standard upon which they've set for themselves. I can accept that that's the standard that they've set for themselves. What I cannot accept is that we accept that. I will not follow weakness. I will not follow corrupt ideals or those who follow corrupt ideals. So if a leader of mine or someone who claims to be my leader exhibits those behaviors, my standard is I do not accept that. I do not accept corruption as a standard. I do not accept weakness as a standard. I do not accept the leader who does not take responsibility ultimately for the people that follow them and the institutions in which they lead. You are responsible as a leader. That is the standard. Otherwise, shut up and sit down. You are responsible to do the things that are hard and necessary and create conflict and resolve conflict. You are responsible for everything that happens in the organization, the group, or society that you lead. And if there is a moral conflict within your organization, within your society, within your nation, within your people, then you are responsible for resolving it. And to wash your hands of it is to wash your hands of being a leader. It's to abdicate your responsibility that you have something that you're supposed to do and say to resolve the problem. Weakness is not an excuse. Weakness of character cannot be our standard for our leaders. And there is coming a time when we'll have to choose new ones. And we have to decide as a society, what kind of leaders do we want? Traditionally, because, well, my mom was a Democrat and my dad was a Democrat, so I have to vote Democrat. Or, my mom was a liberal and my dad was a liberal, so I have to vote liberal. Or do we make up our own minds about who we are and what we've done and what we want and who we are? And then pick leaders who reflect the ideas that we believe should be the standard based on our principles and our modern ideas of what should be and who we should be. There are no standards to which we must hold ourselves other than those that bring us to a higher state of spiritual evolution. We don't have these principles and standards for no reason. We don't struggle with these inner conflict for no reason. They are the basis upon which our sense of self and sense of identity is formed. And that sense of identity becomes the lens through which all of our actions and our visions are projected. Our visions for the future come from that sense of self. And if we are not in control of that self, then we're not in control of our future. We're not in control of our actions. We're not in control of anything that we build. But if we have set standards and principles for how we will behave, who we are, and what we will project into the world, then we decide what comes next. The future is literally written by those who have the vision to see it. And that is based upon our sense of self. And that sense of self is directly a reflection of our spiritual evolution. Who we are, what we are, and what we will become. We are in control of that future. We are in control of what we will become. But it's not something that the past can define. We have to define it now. We have to choose now who we are and who we're going to be in order for us to have that future that we say that we want. It doesn't happen automatically. We make it happen. I want to thank you all for joining me again. Again, the temple is a brick and mortar place. So if you have the means to and the will to, please go to www.paganpathwaystemple.org. Donate if you can. Check out our Pagan Pathways Temple community group, as you are already in, and continue to follow the different programming, classes, and rituals and schedules that we've got set out here for you to enjoy. Give us your feedback. Comment in the group. Feel free to talk to us. We want to hear what you have to say. Ask questions. Ask for, make suggestions about what you'd like to see. We take those into account. We absolutely read them. So, feel free to do that as well. And we will end, as we always do, with our prayer. May the goddess shine within and through you. May her healing spirit fill your heart. May her wisdom guide you. May her love embrace you. And may her peace bless you all the days of your life. So mote it be.
The Bi-Weekly Wiccan Service podcast is brought to you by TechWitch Detroit. TechWitch Detroit for all your IT needs. Please visit us on the web at techwitchdetroit.com. techwitchdetroit.com. We can help. You have just listened to a Pagan Pathways Temple Broadcast Network recording. Pagan Pathways Temple is a 501(c) not-for-profit organization out of beautiful Madison Heights, Michigan. We offer classes, community outreach, event space, and a library available to our members. To find out more or to become a member, please go to paganpathwaystemple.org. Pagan Pathways Temple, growing in the old ways where all paths are open.